These are the Chat City interviews from 103.2 Preston FM.
Now, my next guest in the studio, friend of ours here at Chat City, and of course I was just talking to Caroline Finnegan a few moments ago about the great big knitting day. It's called Knitting, and it's a public day and it's worldwide. And I have to admit, as I did do that, I don't know a lot about knitting, and I don't know if Steve knows a lot about knitting, but if I had to study anything, I must admit I would like to study pubs. And my next guest, Steve Haliwell, has done just that. So Steve, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh.
I think there's quite a lot of sense and intelligence and history and lots of other things attached to studying pubs, as well as a decent pint. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're full of social history.
Yes, and characters, and bring them back to life. So, Steve, you've just or recently your book is now published, Stephen R. Haliwell and its Preston Pubs. And before we talk about the book, tell us how this started. I mean, the interest in pubs and in the history of the pubs here in Preston.
Well, I suppose it started when I attended one of the historical tours of the town with an expert, and we seemed to differ on the locality of a number of the places that he was pointing out. And I thought I'd better do something about this, or myths are going to continue to be perpetuated. So it started with that. And I got myself a small notebook, and it soon became obvious that it was there was more work to it than a small notebook was capable of, and it now runs to 8 loose leaf binders.
Right.
So the point then was, how much information do I need? And I decided that in addition to acquiring an image, whether that's a photograph, a painting from an old Beatty picture, or whatever, any sort of image would be desirable. I also decided that I would create a list of all those people who'd run the various places over the years. And as part of that, I've also included on the website, which this book is based on, I've also put the relevant census returns for all the pubs where it's available.
And of course, before the advent of media and modern day media, press, radio, etc., I mean, pubs were often the focal point, weren't they? Where news was shared and I'm sure exaggerated and passed on in the communities.
There's no doubt that it was the principal social centre, mainly for men, I suppose. But yeah, that's where the gossip was shared and the tales were told, and totally different to what we have today.
And I mean, these days, particularly in rural areas where we hear more or less a pub a week disappears, that we don't have them any longer. I mean, here in Preston, there was a pub on every corner, and I think
Virtually.
Around the Flag Market, how many pubs was located in that one area? It was very much focused on the pubs, wasn't it?
Yeah. The area where the Harris Library is now, the Harris Museum, it is. I've suggested in the book that the 10 licensed premises, whether they were just beer houses or an inn or a tavern, at least 10 were sacrificed just to build that one building. And there were others besides, as you say, around the marketplace.
And what about the range in those days of alcohol that was sold, or spirits? I mean, was a lot of the alcohol brewed locally or brewed on the pub
premises? The vast majority were brewed on the premises. Many were only licensed to sell beer. Others had wine licenses, others had full licenses which allowed them to sell anything. I've made no differentiation between them. I've included them because some, of course, were beer houses and ultimately became fully licensed, but it would get far too complicated for an edition like this. So they're all lumped together as places of resource for a drink.
Right. And were they open all the time? I mean, in those days, was it more or less 24-hour drinking?
They weren't 24 hours, but they were as near as could be to that. Many of them that were in the vicinity of a market, for instance, would open at 5 o'clock in the morning, for the benefit of both the traders and visitors to the market, but particularly the traders. So yeah, they had flexible opening times.
And during the time of researching the book, what's been some of the fascinating points that you found out that, you know, has been a bit of a surprise in researching?
I think that the thing that fascinates me most is the retention within a family of certain public houses. The suggestion to me there is that it's profitable. It's one that they want to keep in the family. The difficulty comes where the daughter of a licensee marries and her new husband takes over as the licensee, and as far as the documentation's concerned, we've got a change of name and therefore a change of family, but it ain't necessarily so.
Right.
And the more I hear from, because this sort of thing can only come from families who write to tell me, my Auntie Nellie, a great Auntie Nellie, used to have such and such a pub, but she married so and so, and the name changed. And as far as I'm concerned, that's gone out of the family until I learn otherwise. And that for me is a real fascination.
And in the writing of the book and in the research, I mean, that's been one of the things that has happened, is that people have corresponded with you from around the world to tell you information.
They have indeed. And the ones from abroad seem more willing to disclose the details of their past and their ancestors than perhaps people at home. I don't know, but they perhaps don't feel as vulnerable in Australia.
That's right, yeah. So what was the oldest pub then that you looked at here in Preston?
Well, the oldest one that still exists, I suppose, is the old Blue Bell in Church Street. That goes back to probably the late 1600s. And establishing others which don't exist now can be fraught with doubt. You can establish that they perhaps were there because I've seen them detailed in legal documents, but it doesn't necessarily tell you. On the north side of Church Street is about as close as you can get to a location. Well, one can only assume from the time, the date, that they would be closer to the town centre than the lower end of Church Street, but that really is about as far as you can get.
Right. And during the research and looking into the history of this, I mean, is there evidence of the importance that the pubs did play in communities, and what about any kind of evidence in the relationship with the church?
I've not found a great deal of evidence of connection with churches, other than those that were close to churches invariably had stables which were used to house the horses while their owners were at church. The one that sticks in my mind as far as that's concerned was the Church Hotel on North Road, at the corner